The Battle of Midway is said to be the turning point in the Pacific theater during World War II and was a battle between the United States and Japan. What caused the battle was that the Japanese admiral, Isuruku Yamamoto, planned to expand Japanese control past Midway, and this is what sparked the fire of the battle. Admiral Yamamoto believed that his plan would be very successful because of how the months prior to this, Japan had been on a streak of victory over the Americans. This included the sinking of the USS Lexington. The entirety of Yamamoto's plan was based off of the belief that the US did not yet crack the Japanese naval code JN-25. However, it had successfully been cracked already, making any plan the Japanese had be revealed to the Americans. The first of Yamamoto's plan began with taking the Aleutian Islands, which are at the very tip of Alaska. He wanted to do this so that the Japanese could have bombing runs into this state. At the Battle of the Coral Sea 1 month before the Battle of Midway, the USS Yorktown was damaged, but then repaired at Pearl Harbor in 72 hours, even though it was expected to take months to repair. This was vital for the Americans because of how the Japanese forces were expected to have 5 carriers, and without the Yorktown, the US only had 2. The Japanese forces were also in shambles from the Battle of Coral Sea, where they lost the light carrier Shoho, had to repair the carrier Showaku, and where the carrier Zuikaku had lost half of its air force. Commander Joseph A. Roquefort of the U.S. forces used the decoded Japanese messaging system JN-25 to decode a message that said the Japanese forces were going to try and take Midway. This allowed for the U.S. forces to focus more troops into saving the island, which was so vital because of how it allowed for the U.S. to advance into the Pacific further. This is Midway Island in the calm before the storm. The storm being the battle which would crush Japanese morale, allowing for American forces to push on further towards Japan, eventually bringing World War II to a close. If the Battle of Midway was lost, many more American lives would have been lost as well, and the American mainland would have been invaded, making this battle very vital to the entire war effort. All of a sudden, at around 7:10 a.m. on June 4th, 6 TBF Avengers and 4 B-26s from the U.S. forces spotted the Japanese forces, and all hell began to break loose, starting with the American forces bombing the Japanese ships. The Americans began strong as they began their surprise attack. This really baffled the Japanese because of how they thought that the Americans had no clue that they were coming. They then inflicted a good amount of damage, but not nearly enough to stop the massive Japanese force that awaited them. Once the Japanese forces are spotted, 67 dive bombers, 29 torpedo bombers, and 20 Wildcats take off for the Spruans. 16 dive bombers then take off from the Midway Island. 17 B-17s also take off from Midway Island and attack. Then 11 bombers of the U.S. Navy from Midway Island also attack. Following that, 12 torpedo bombers, 17 dive bombers, and 6 Wildcats take off from the Yorktown. The Japanese Air Force then counterattacked the American ships of the Yorktown, Enterprise, and the Hornet, as well as the Midway Island, targeting points such as gas reserves and planes that were not yet in the air. The Japanese mainly used B-7A torpedo bombers that were sent off from the Japanese ships Soryu, Hiryu, Akagi, Kaga, and Zoikaku. Soon after the Japanese counterattacks, the American forces then came back on another counterattack, effectively taking the Japanese ships Soryu and Kaga out of the equation. At the same time, the U.S. forces also did significant damage to the Hiryu and Akagi. Nighttime proved to be good news for the American forces because as the sun rose, the Hiryu and Akagi airships that were damaged the night before were left abandoned because of the amount of damage that was given to them. By the time the battle ended, 3,057 Japanese soldiers had died. In addition, the destroyers Arashio and Asashio were both damaged. Float planes were also lost from the cruisers Chikuma and Tubby. There were also more dead aboard the destroyers Tanakaze, Arashi, Kazugumo, and the fleet oiler Akebono Maru. In total, the Japanese lost 4 carriers, 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 12 destroyers, 248 carrier-based aircraft, and 16 float planes. The Americans only lost 307 soldiers, 3 carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 15 destroyers, 233 carrier-based aircrafts, 127 land-based aircrafts, and 16 submarines. The Battle of Midway has often been called the turning point in the Pacific. It was the Allies' first major naval victory against the Japanese. Although the Japanese continued to secure more territory, Midway allowed the Allies to switch to the strategic initiative. This paved the way for the landings on Guadalcanal and the prolonged attrition of the Solomon Islands campaign. Midway also allowed this to occur before the first of the new Essex-class fleet carriers became available at the end of 1942. Also, some authors have stated that heavy losses in carriers and veteran air crews at Midway permanently weakened the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Battle of Midway may have left Midway Island in shambles. However, it was a vital victory and a necessary win in World War II for the Americans. This will always be remembered as a great naval battle and a victory.